Hi, I'm Stephanie Silverman, one of the owners and founders of Your Teen Media. Today's workshop focuses on distance learning and its impact on students with learning differences. I want to thank our sponsor, Lawrence School. Lawrence is the school of choice for students who learn differently. Their small class sizes and specialized instruction successfully prepare students with dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, and ADHD for college and beyond. They know that great minds don't think alike. You can also do a FaceTime live tour with an admissions rep to see for yourself. Visit lawrenceschool.org. Enjoy the workshop.
Hi, Sue Borison here from Your Teen Media, and today I'm speaking with Kelly Christian, a psychologist and the director of the Shafer Center for Learning Differences at Lawrence School. So thanks so much for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.
This must be a particularly tricky time for kids who have learning differences. Can you start by defining what that is?
Sure. So learning differences is a pretty broad term, and it's really discussing and covering three different groups of students. So those are students who have a learning disorder, such as a reading disorder like dyslexia, a written expression disorder, sometimes referred to as dysgraphia, or a mathematics disorder, sometimes referred to as dyscalculia. It's also referring to students with ADHD, which by the time you're in adolescence, often these are students who have been bombarded with lots of strategies and tools to help them organize and help them get their materials turned in on time and help them with their thinking and their process of thinking. Yet they know all these things, but they just don't know when to use these tools and strategies. Okay.
So by the time they've hit adolescence, they've had interventions that have been trying to help them?
More often than not, yes. Yep.
Do the interventions change as the child gets old? Like if you've learned techniques to get you through, let's say, sixth grade, when you hit multiple teachers and the curriculum changes, do you have to do something different at that time?
Yep, I think the skills often build upon each other over time. So in the beginning, you might learn like a basic 2-column note for note taking and for studying. And as you advance through school, you might learn more advanced strategies like how to annotate as you're reading, right? And so they'll learn all these strategies, and in the moment, they just forget to use it when they're supposed to use it. Which is why, the best way I describe kids with ADHD is that they're consistently inconsistent, which is what makes teaching them challenging and what makes parenting challenging kids with ADHD.
But to me, everything you're saying applies to all my kids who didn't have learning differences. Like, that's they often know what to do, but don't always apply it.
Right. So that's somewhat developmentally normative, but these are students where it is just much more exaggerated and has impairing effects, right? So rather than kind of being able to kind of play catch up at the end of the week, they really continue to fall apart and snowball until they're failing, right? So they just need more hands-on.
So it interferes with their ability to succeed.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So what are the common challenges that come from, like, you're a parent and your kid has learning differences by the time they're in middle school, but maybe the challenges are changing now and maybe again in high school. What are those challenges?
The challenges are really being able to keep up and keep pace with your peers. So students with learning differences generally are really bright, but they might, if it's a reading disorder, for instance, they're going to struggle to fluently read at a pace similar to their peers, or their spelling is really poor as a function of their dyslexia. And so when they have to read or write something, it's going to take them much longer to do that task because the nature of dyslexia is that it's neurobiological and requires much more brain power to get the task done than someone without dyslexia. So they fatigue quickly, and because their spelling is poor and they're a bright kid, often what they'll do is they'll try when they're writing to use other words that they know how to spell rather than use the words that they want to use. And so their writing is often not as sophisticated as their ability to tell what they know. So fluency is an issue for sure for these students as adolescents. The other thing is if a student does not understand their disorder well, they may not know how to self-advocate, right? So if it's never been defined to a student that like, oh, I have this thing called dyslexia, and what does that mean? They then struggle to self-advocate because they don't know themselves as a student and what they do really well versus what they struggle with.
Oh, that's such an interesting point. So I think, and I don't know if this is changing now, but I feel like for a while there were parents who didn't want to label their kids. Like they felt like it would be a detriment. So, and also to protect their, the sense that you're protecting your kid. So you're saying that that doesn't really help them.
Not really. If we can define what the concern is, oftentimes then children can, embrace it and be able to self-advocate, right? I think the biggest misconception for kids with a learning disorder is that they're not smart, right? So the definition of a learning disorder is that you have to be smart. You have to be smart and have unexpected underachievement. So if you have this gap between like how bright you are and what your academic output looks like, that's really the definition of a learning disorder. And so it can be really helpful for kids to know that, okay, it's not that I'm dumb. It's that my brain does not use this intuitive, simple pathway to read or write or complete a math problem. Instead, it's doing this really kind of, it's utilizing a pathway that requires multiple areas of your brain to function at the same time. So it's fatiguing and exhausting. And so they peter out much faster than someone without a learning disorder.
So it's interesting. You're talking about this gap, which is a really easy visual to understand. Are there things that parents can do before you even set out to do learning that will help them bridge that gap? So or shrink the gap?
Absolutely. So, and you're talking about environmental support?
Yes.
So I'm actually quite thankful right now because a lot of clinicians that have been doing interviews like this with you have brought up the importance of mindfulness and being present. And that is one huge factor for students with learning disorders, or learning differences. At Lawrence School, we actually teach mindfulness, and then we also utilize strategies like square breathing to help students visualize the calming down method while breathing in slowly for 4, holding for 4, breathing out for 4, holding for 4, and doing that over and over again. And the way we reinforce that for our students at our upper school, our cover sheets of our exams all have that visual of square breathing on top of the exam. So it's just a reminder that, look, before we set out to, give you this opportunity to show us what you know on this math test, we want you to still have your mind become more still and calm so that you can think as efficiently as you can.
So that one thing makes a difference.
Huge difference.
Wow.
Yeah. If you can reduce your stress level, your thinking will be just much more fluent. And remember, kids with learning differences, the number one thing is really they're not as fluent as their peers. They just need more time to show what they know.
Okay, anything else?
Yes. So in terms of distance learning, if your environment is really set up for you, meaning you have your special space that this is where I do my reading or in my reading nook, or this is, I do my math at the kitchen table. You have a space that's set up for you, that's routine, that you're used to going to day in and day out. And you have the tools you need accessible to you, right? So we want to make sure that students have internet or hotspots, pens, pencils, calculators, everything they need right there in their space so they don't have to get up, leave the space, and become distracted along the way. So having your environment set up is really valuable.
What are the top 3 concerns that you see students struggling with right now in terms of this distance learning?
What I'm coming across are that students are experiencing a lot of academic fatigue. And I think that's largely due to the fact that the adrenaline of the stay-at-home order is really kind of worn off at this point, right? And now there's just a lot of monotony with day in and day out school. So there's fatigue with just having to learn on your own, especially for students who, I'll say that students with learning differences frequently thrive socially, and that they enjoy their peers and enjoy schools, and they like that one-on-one contact with teachers, and they're just not getting it right now. So they're not getting as energized and excited about school as they once were. So the fatigue is a major aspect, or a major concern right now. The screen time, the level of screen time that's required is also providing a lot of fatigue. So, I think back to something Sophia Lepersky told me, that's our academic technology coach. She just reminded me, don't forget about 20-20-20, which is for every 20 minutes, you have to look away 20 feet for 20 seconds in order to reduce your eye strain and fatigue of looking at your Zoom meeting for as long as you are. Okay.
That's good for me. My eyes are so tired at the end of the day. I didn't know that one. So 20-20-20. Thank you.
Yeah, 20-20-20 is the golden rule. Okay, here.
Yeah.
The other one are that students are just simply overwhelmed by the level of academics required of them at this point. And so the process, as much as we can, simplify the process of finding assignments, completing them, and turning them in, the better. I find that when students have time with a teacher at the beginning and the end of the day, those students are finding much more success right now with the stay-at-home order. So they have a teacher that's identified that checks in with them at a particular time of the day. They will help them organize their daily agenda. And it might mean, here's what you're doing for the morning versus after lunch. So it's not too much too soon for the student. And then they're going to help that student problem solve any hiccups that they've encountered.
So that's happening every day at Lawrence?
Oh, yes. So they do check-ins in the morning and in the afternoon, every single day with their advisor.
I just want to say, how are these teachers doing this? I mean, it's a lot.
It is, yes. So part of it is our upper school teachers are teaching slightly different than our lower school. Our lower school is doing a lot of direct instruction with live instruction, while our upper school staff, they are recording lectures, and then during the day they are available for helping the students in individual meetings. And then they also come together in groups throughout the day as well. But that's how they're making themselves as available as possible to help these kids get around these obstacles.
So people go to Lawrence because of all of these extras. I mean, it's really an extraordinary place. But a lot of the people listening to this are not going to be at Lawrence, and they're going to be in a public school system where the resources aren't as available. So do you have any suggestions for those parents whose kids might really be struggling with the, there's a lot of freedom to get assignments without classroom time. So any suggestions for those parents?
Yes, I think those parents, if they haven't done so already, they really should have your child connect with at least one teacher. Students that are thriving right now in the distance learning, generally were doing quite well before the distance learning, and one of the reasons why was because they were socially connected to teachers and staff. Okay, so the more you can have your student connected with a teacher, the better, because that teacher can then help your student self-advocate as needed. But they can also help the student navigate any new process that might be occurring. So in some public school settings, teachers may not be communicating with one another how they are assigning work and how they are accepting work. So if you have multiple teachers accepting work in multiple ways, like it might be a Google form that they are submitting versus an email for a different teacher, that can become really confusing for a student with a learning difference. So having an identified teacher, that would be helpful. Somebody else in the public school setting that has an IEP, they would be able to contact their case manager for the IEP. And that case manager is supposed to help the family and the student navigate this, and how are they getting their intervention and accommodation goals met during this distance learning.
And
So
if you
that's the
have
other.
you should already have a relationship with somebody that you've been working with in the past. So you're just encouraging parents to help their kids reach out to those people even more so now.
Exactly.
And
Yep.
if your kid has a hard time reaching out, we talk about the idea of creating independent adults and giving them things to do on their own. Are kids with learning differences more able, less able? Like, should parents help them differently because maybe they can't pick up the phone and call their person that's in the high school?
I would suggest they're capable of self-advocating when they know themselves best, right? So if they know, you know, why they have a learning difference or what that means for them learning, they're much more capable of self-advocating. But as a parent, I think the best place to start is just with a simple, how can I help? Because if you could just ask them how I can help versus dictating and taking over, now you're starting to take over more of an enabling approach. You really want the student to try and problem solve. If they are just so overwhelmed right now, they might say, I need you to call Mrs. So-and-so because I can't do it and I don't want to do it and I'm worried. Then, you might have to take that step for them. If you feel like your student could do this and they just simply need encouragement, then I would remind them of the many times they've been able to overcome obstacles prior to this and find a way to scaffold them reaching out to their person at the school the best that you can for your particular child.
That's fantastic advice. And I think that one question, how can I help you, is like, it applies everywhere in life with our
Yes.
kids. Like, it's just such a good starting point. But here, it's great advice. Okay, so my last question for you, if you picked your one big takeaway for parents who are listening right now, what would you do to give them the encouragement they need to make this work?
I think for parents, what they need to remember is to take the long view, right? So I remind parents of this at our initial meeting when I'm first diagnosing a child with a learning difference. I encourage them to think about what is their child going to be like in the future and how do you want your relationship with that child to look in the future. And more importantly, right now, because so many of us are under chronic stress and there's a lot of change all at once for everybody. It's important to take a step back and really work on your relationship with your child, right? The school stuff, the further we get away from school, the less any of this right now matters, right? When we look back at school, again, the reason why this is just so incredibly heartbreaking for seniors are that they look back on those social moments that they're going to be missing out on, not the math homework that piled up, at their senior year. So I think if parents can think about the long view and that, if you're taking time to, work on puzzles together instead of math homework, please do it. The other thing that I think it's really valuable to think about is the rule of, like, we call it the magic ratio of 1 to 5. I don't know if you've heard of this rule. So John Gottman talks about how for every 1 negative interaction, we need 5 positive interactions in order to negate that 1. Students with learning differences are bombarded by negative interactions, right? It's, you didn't turn this in. You're not answering fast enough. Someone mumbling, what's wrong with you? You're stupid. Why aren't you thinking of this right away? And so if they are bombarded by these negative interactions or negative self-thoughts, they really need a tremendous amount of positive reinforcement and kudos for what they're doing right now and doing well. So the more parents can try and make that a balance, right? Focusing on what they're doing really well right now, calling them out on how well they're handling situations, praising them for when they take a beat to relax and calm down when they're stressed out, things like that. I think are really going to be beneficial for children with learning differences. And parents will see a positive outcome from that.
That's a beautiful way to end. Really wonderful advice. Kelly Christian, Director of the Shafer Center for Learning Differences at Lawrence School. Thanks so much for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.